Eagle Community Television presents Community Connection with your host, Mike Cooper.
Hello and welcome again to Community Connection from Eagle Community Television. Thanks for watching, and thanks to our producer, Jeff Durrell. We're at Rarick Hall on the campus of Fort Hays State University, visiting with Professor Dr. Keith Campbell, Professor of Sociology at Fort Hays State University, now in his 41st year of teaching at Fort Hays State University. I say professor, and I should say author as well, the author of the publication Social Entrepreneurship, a Grassroots Revolution. And as I told Dr. Campbell earlier, if I may, Keith, since we've known each other for 40 years, I think,
Right.
I didn't even realize he was an author until I saw the book displayed on the cabinet at President Martin's office, and wanted him to at least mention social entrepreneurship before we begin. Keith, what is it?
Well, social entrepreneurship is the use of innovation to find new ways to help categories of people in need. For example, the homeless, abandoned children, frail elderly, teens considering suicide. And my department, the Department of Sociology and Social Work, has begun a program in social entrepreneurship. We started about 4 years ago. And we think it's going to be one of the very fruitful areas in the United States and in the world, helping train people how to start projects to help others in need.
Not only in the United States, but throughout the world. Then.
That's correct. In fact, I think that the greatest growth potential is in developing nations where the middle class is growing, the wealth is being spread out more evenly than in the past. And so middle class people, of course, they don't have to worry so much about getting food. They are a little bit more thoughtful, I think, about the world that they live in. And when people transition from being poor to middle class status, they become more aware of the world around them, and they see other people in need, and they have some free time and the opportunity to help others if they choose to. And so I think as nations continue to develop and change, and especially along with the technology that we have, the connectivity that we have between people all around the world, there are increasing opportunities for people who want to help others in need to do so, to start projects.
But in that context, with the declining middle class that we see here in the United States, people have to focus more on the basics, and they may tend to move away from that, Keith.
Well, that's correct. I think the situation involves both directions, because there's always change, and there's always up, and there's always down. But the main thrust in many developing nations, China, some other nations in Asia, I think in India and some of the nations in South America, the basic trend line is in the direction of an increasing middle class. But there will always be some up and down fluctuation.
This must be what's exciting about being in the university and the teaching profession, because you can energize these young people who have the energy, they'll have the knowledge, and they'll have the desire to do this kind of work, Keith.
It is exciting. I feel very energized. The opportunity that we have, I mean, being in the university, it really helps I have a little bit more time maybe to think about these things than people in other occupations. But what excites me so much is the model that we're taking here at my university is a focus on normal, everyday people, starting small projects to help just a small number of people. And the opportunity for so many people in the world to help categories of people that they care about, that they've decided that are important to them, those opportunities are there, and I think they'll be increasing in the years ahead.
And time and again, we've seen the importance of even small beginnings blossoming into huge movements, if you will.
That's correct. And most small beginnings won't blossom into huge movements. And that does not detract from their importance. The way, I mean, to start a small project, small projects are easier to start, and they're easier to manage. And so they're less of a threat to people who want to start projects to help others in need. And so there's greatness in smallness when good is being done, just as there's greatness in largeness.
This is going to be a fascinating read. Social Entrepreneurship, Dr. Keith Campbell, a grassroots revolution. Well, actually, we came here to talk about photography in China, so we better get to that, I think, Keith.
Okay.
Because part of your work in the Department of Sociology and Social Work has been research on social change in rural China. You recently had a display of photography that you had done, because that's a kind of a hobby, if you will, an offshoot of your work.
Right.
Talk about what you hope to capture in these photographs.
Well, what I enjoy, I've been just an amateur photographer for quite a few years, and what I enjoy most is simply documenting what exists. And for some of my personal photography, I do some macro photography of items that people see, but they don't see it in the detail that exists sometimes. But I basically enjoy documentary photography, and so in China, all I have sought to do is to document what exists. But it's within the context of an expectation that in China, dramatic change has been occurring and will continue to occur. And so through Fort Hays State's affiliation with a Chinese university in Xinjiang, China, that being CIOS University, I've had the opportunity outside of the classroom, when I had time, when I was not teaching, to go into the rural countryside and photograph. But I've simply wanted to record what exists.
And in doing so, you also were able not only to document what you saw, but also to preserve it so that we can get an idea of what you've been seeing, as well as doing the teaching at CIOS University.
Right. For anybody who enjoys seeing what I photographed, I'm happy to share that.
And let's begin with the top large picture there first, to give us some documentation of what we're seeing here, if we could, Keith.
Okay. Well, this is a photograph of a family, an extended family, and they were cutting corn stalk with a large knife that had a base and a hinge on one end. At the end of the season, getting rid of the matter that is a part of the agricultural process and converting it into fertilizer is important. So they'll be soaking this cut up corn stalk and letting it deteriorate, and then they'll be using it for fertilizer in their fields.
Let's move to another large
Okay.
picture there and explain what we're seeing there, if you
Okay.
would. And of course, if you'll notice, no major machines, no big industrial equipment like we would be used to here in western Kansas.
Correct. All of these photos are from a village that no longer exists. It was a village on a small hill, or excuse me, a large hill or a very small mountain, sort of a rocky area. And this photograph, I spent about 2 years searching for a village to focus on in terms of my studies. It wasn't a full 2 years because I'm able to go to China only infrequently, but 2 years worth of my trips to China, and I found this one village of about 37 people, and they were one of the poorest villages that I'd found. And this is a courtyard that I thought that I find just to be beautiful because of its complexity and also some simplicity there, I guess. But it's a courtyard of one of my friends in this village.
What happened to the village, Keith?
Well, let's see, I think about 2 years ago, everybody was forcibly removed. The village was called, the name was Yanjiamar, and people had been there for 300 or 400 years. The government of China, the Beijing government, decided that they wanted to start a national park in this pretty forested area. so much of China is agricultural. There's so many people there, as we all know, and so they're in the eastern part of China, to find an area that's forested and pretty is somewhat rare. So the government gave the villagers about 1 year. They let them know about 1 year ahead of time that they were going to have to move, and the government helped them move and built some apartment type homes for them in a nearby city, but the government forcibly removed them from this area so that China could start a national park in this location.
And this village had been there for hundreds, thousands of years?
I think not thousands, but several hundred years, based on the interviewing that I was doing. And what's interesting is that a Chinese colleague of mine and I were engaged in some fairly intensive and extensive interviewing of the people, and so this has brought an interesting shift in our study of these people.
Something that's been fascinating to me, and one of the things I wanted to ask Keith to describe, is his work on photography of hands. Now, talk about your photography of hands and how that plays into your overall outlook on what you're seeing, Keith.
Well, let's see, I've made 22 trips to China, and I started in 1999, I think, and so I've had quite a few opportunities to photograph, and on every trip I've gone to the rural areas and engaged in some photography. On one of my trips, I was just trying to think of something a little bit different, a little bit of a focus maybe to take on my upcoming trip, and I was thinking that hands are an important part of humans, and what we do is so, our hands are so much involved in so many of the things that we do. So I thought, well, maybe it might be interesting just to see what emerges if I tried to photograph people doing what they normally do, but zero in on their hands. And so that's what has emerged.
When we talked about this, it was interesting because I got to thinking about the relationship in our agricultural rural area and how much hands play such an important part. Even with the mechanization that we have, still it becomes a basic use of the hands.
That's a good point, and I think it to me, in my thinking, the use of, I mean, this is just almost a silly thing, but I've become very interested in it in terms of that photography. But in just about anything we do, hands are so important, and we often view people holistically, which is very appropriate, but to focus on parts is sometimes interesting. And I have quite a few other photos on hands that I did not bring this morning, but I enjoyed that part of my photography.
Now, for all of photographers, amateur and professional, who view your work and also hear this, what do you use? What kind of equipment do you use?
Well, these photos were taken between the year 2000 and 2006, and I had I think most of these that I brought today are from a Mamiya medium format camera. I think it's 2¼ inch by 2¼ inch negative. By the way, all of these photos were prior to digital existed, but the megapixels were very small, and they weren't very high quality at that time. So I was still using film. And then also I had a couple 35mm Nikon FM2 cameras that I used.
Have you gone digital now?
I have, yes. Well, I have gone digital, but to be honest, I went back to my FM2s, and I'm shooting film again, and I've taken it all the way back to black and white just for fun. So I'm shooting black and white film now.
And that film presented somewhat of a challenge in getting through airports and such.
It did. International travel creates back when film was being used, it creates some problems with the going through the customs areas. And although sometimes the X-rays don't harm the film, I preferred not to have any of my films X-rayed, so it was a little bit cumbersome.
We have a couple of minutes left, Keith. I'd like for you to talk about the changes you've witnessed over these 22 times that you've been able to visit China.
China's just changing dramatically. The appearance of the place, the opportunities for the people. I've spent most of my time in rural China, and I've made many friends through a translator. I'm not fluent in Mandarin, so I always use a translator. But I feel like I've made many friends, and they've been very friendly to me. And when I've talked seriously about their lives, most of them have indicated their excitement about entering the middle class, about moving away from poor farming. And to me, that's ironic a little bit, because I respect farmers and I respect people who are directly involved with nature so much. And a part of what I respect about that lifestyle is those people in China, there's labor involved, they're very healthy, they get a lot of exercise, they're eating very well, but they understandably wanted to move into an easier way of life, even though, to my better friends, I pointed out there are going to be some problems. The crime rate's going to go up, the divorce rate's going to go up, and the typical problems that occur. But dramatic change, partly in terms of opportunities for poorer people, and that relates to a point I was making earlier about the growing middle class that relates to social entrepreneurship. Unquestionably, the middle class is growing dramatically in China.
Will you be going back?
I look forward to going back. I've been away for about a year and a half, and I'm getting itchy to get back and see my friends.
More dramatic changes coming probably then.
Yes,
Bring
undoubtedly.
them back in photos so that we can enjoy them, would you?
I'll do what I can, yes.
Dr. Keith Campbell, Professor of Sociology and Social Work at Fort Hays State University, our Community Connection. Thanks for watching.